Hey folks, you've made it. This is it, the final video for the enlightenment unit. So far we've looked at everything from string theory and scientific enlightenment to what enlightenment means in the 21st century, and of course we started 2,500 years ago with Plato's The Cave, which set up everything. And today we're going to come to the final piece. Again, we opened with an understanding of what enlightenment originally meant according to the Greeks with our buddy Plato there, and then we come through the scientific would be one, and then the second, of course, would be 21st century enlightenment. And of course, you know, we English teachers, we always love the rule of three. So our third piece of the modern view of this is going to be what I like to call, being somebody who grew up in the United States, it's our intellectual declaration of independence. And it also kind of comes full circle from that very first day where I made you guys all go stand out in the cold and read that Thoreau quote. Henry David Thoreau was part of this movement in America over 100 years ago now called Transcendentalism, and the basic root of the idea of Transcendentalism was that you had to try to get beyond your preconceptions of what the world was supposed to be and who you're supposed to be in it, and to transcend those expectations and those norms and to start to make decisions and observations for yourself. And one of the people that inspired him is Ralph Waldo Emerson. And so today's video, which you'll find the link below in the OneNote there, it is I guess like a crash course on who Emerson was and what he believed in. So with that in mind, let us see if we can get over to it here. We're not going to watch the whole thing, obviously, because you can go watch it yourself. But there's a bit that I kind of wanted to talk to. So a few things to note are that this is similar to the TED Talk that we looked at for the cave, but it's also got sort of that animated style that should help you to stay focused on what he's talking about. But really, one of the things that I really like about this video, and one of the reasons why I think it's really important to study Emerson, is because we live in a very scientifically focused society right now, where we tend to believe that science and technology are the keys to building a good world and a good life. And those things are certainly true, because after all, without scientific and technological development, we probably would have never developed agriculture or roads or any of the other things that have laid the foundations for our modern advanced society. However, what we don't often think about is how the ability for the inventors who created those things to think outside the proverbial box was based on the foundation of people like Emerson, who made it part of our culture to celebrate the ability to think outside the box. And it's one of the reasons why we've tried to bring it into this class. So this video, as you're watching here, and we'll just look at a few short parts of it, it's kind of trying to make the point that Emerson and this Transcendentalist movement really laid the foundations for the world we live in today, in which we prize outside the box thinking, and we celebrate it, and we don't fear it. And it's one of the reasons why we're starting to make some real progress on economic and social problems that exist in the world, but also we're starting to ask really serious questions about what progress really looks like. If you think about 100 years ago, all that we really cared about as a society was becoming richer and more powerful. But as a result of these sorts of people changing the way we think about the world, we're now starting to ask questions about at what point does our economic progress start to have too much of a negative effect on our environment? Or if you spend your entire life trying to be the doctor that your parents wanted you to be, and then finding out that you hated that later, have you really lived a good life, even if you end up with a pile of money at the end? The answer isn't always yes or no to that, but the reality is that if you can't think for yourself, you'll never know what you really wanted out of your life. And I'm sure you guys have all heard that term like midlife crisis that a lot of people go through. I think one of the reasons why people go through it is that they spend the first 40 or so years of their life being what they think they're supposed to be, and then they suddenly reach a point in their life where they start to wonder, well, why am I not satisfied if I've done everything I was supposed to do? So these are a lot of big questions, and to come to that question when you're at that point in your life might be pretty depressing, and it certainly upsets a lot of people. So maybe if we can work on this whole enlightenment idea, and you guys can start asking the questions now as you're making the decisions about what you want to do with your life, you'll have a better chance of choosing what's really right for you, not what you think is socially or economically acceptable. Emerson wants you to make decisions based on what your heart is telling you, what your true nature is telling you to do. And even though it's not always feasible, and it's certainly not always easy, it might be what is ultimately best for you in the long run. But just like in Plato's The Cave, it hurts your eyes when you come out of that cave and you see the light for the first time. Just like how making the decision not to do this thing that's going to make you a bunch of money and instead do this thing that's going to make you happy, that can hurt because that's going to cost you a significant amount of pocket change, to put it mildly. Anyways, without overdoing it, because you'll watch it yourself, let's just take a look at a few things here. We'll watch the beginning and the end, and then you guys can kind of fill it in yourselves. So this is enlightenment in literature. And this is just like in class where you guys had to listen to me start and stop and all that sort of stuff. So here we go. Literature.
Ralph Waldo Emerson is the father of American literature. In a series of strikingly original essays written in the mid-19th century, he fundamentally changed the way that America saw its cultural and artistic possibilities, and he enabled a separation from transatlantic literary traditions. "We have listened too long," he wrote, "to the courtly muses of Europe." Emerson's ejection of cultural traditions brought about what one contemporary called America's intellectual Declaration of Independence.
And so there's the key that I like to use to focus this lesson. So what is an intellectual Declaration of Independence? Well, we all know the political Declaration of Independence, when the U.S. decided and said that we're going to break away and become our own country. We're not going to follow the rules that Britain had before. We in Canada were a little more subtle about it. We just kind of asked about 100 years later, and Britain said okay. In any case, though, an intellectual Declaration of Independence, according to what they're showing us here, is basically Emerson saying that we have to stop just following the way of thinking that we inherited from Europe. That we have to start thinking like Americans. Now, this is a really American-focused thing because Emerson was himself American, but I think it transcends national borders, especially in the modern age where we're all starting to think more globally now. And what he's trying to tell us here is that we need to intellectually declare our independence. We need to put the past behind us, not ignore it, but to put it behind us and start making decisions based on the realities of today. And what that means is that if it means burning down our planet in order to make some money, maybe it's worth considering an alternate route. Or just because we've always thought this way about a particular group of people and maybe treated them in a certain way, often negative, maybe those preconceptions that we used to have that we felt justified that behavior are not in fact okay. And it's these realizations that are helping to drive us forward to making a more fair and a healthier society. So it's really interesting to me, and I hope for you, to kind of see how the roots of this very positive development in our society can be traced all the way back to this movement, and this Emerson guy. Not him specifically, but that whole era and that whole way of thinking laid the groundwork for the social, economic, and scientific open-mindedness that we have today. Now, I'm not going to have you guys watch the whole thing here. I'll kind of skip to the end, but one of the big points that he sort of comes up with is that by seeing the world as it really is instead of how we want it to be or how we've always seen it in the past, it allows us to make better decisions and probably live a better life and to better understand the world. So I'm skipping forward to this scene here. You probably recognize it. This is, of course, a artist rendition of Moby Dick. And one of the things that he kind of points out in the video here is that Moby Dick was a story about Captain Ahab obsessively hunting the whale, but it also was a story about how the United States obsessively tries to develop itself into an imperial economic power, and by doing that it may eventually do something that causes it to destroy itself, just like other obsessed individuals and nation states have done in the past. So we'll just watch the last minute here together, and then I'll say a few things, and then you guys will be done for today and on to the assignment.
Allegory of American imperialism and the defiance of nature. In the 20th century, the American critic Harold Bloom looked back at Emerson's originality and saw in it the origin of the strong tradition of American poets. from Robert Frost and Wallace Stevens to John Ashbery. Emerson's legacy to American literature and culture, and indeed to the world, was one of ceaseless invention and forward momentum. As he put it, I unsettle all things. No facts are to me sacred, none are profane. I simply experiment, an endless seeker with no past at my back.
So he's an endless seeker with no past at his back. In other words, he is free from the constraints of how he's been told to think or behave or things that he's supposed to value according to society. And as a result, he's free to experiment. He's free to discover. He's free to explore and to ask questions that may not have occurred to him otherwise. And just think, if people didn't have that mindset, they would not have developed the technology that has led to our creature comforts today or the opportunities that we have today. If it hadn't been for that development, we wouldn't have the ability to do classes online. So much of our modern world is based on the fact that this development happened in the past in the terms of the way that people think. The other point that he makes in the video, which I wanted to briefly talk about, is this concept that we tend to think very either nostalgic about the past, and we're like, oh, I wish I could have lived in that era all those decades or centuries ago, or we tend to think about how amazing things might be in the future, and so we sort of lose the sense of the value of the present. And one of the things that he says is that if you're truly enlightened, you kind of realize that there is no time better than now, and there are no people better than people today, that the heroes of old may in fact have been quite dry and simple people, whereas the ordinary people of today might also have something wonderful about them. That's kind of nice to hear, I think, probably. And it's very much a part of our culture, where we tend to believe that everybody is special and everybody has something unique to offer. And so, coming back to that kind of point there, it seems to essentially justify us all as individuals trying to figure out what matters, and to have this concept that right now is just as great as any other time in history and just as terrible as any other time in history. I think it kind of takes the pressure off, in the sense that you can view what's going on now through a kind of a different lens. And so let's look at the COVID-19 situation. Everybody is, socially isolating. A lot of routines are disrupted, and as a result, it's quite stressful for a lot of people. I've gotten so many emails from so many of you talking about how you find it difficult to get motivated during all of this, and that's totally understandable. But think about this. Imagine what going through this is going to do for your perseverance. If we make it through this, which I'm pretty sure we will, we're going to come out on the other side with a new appreciation of what normal is. I think that you will appreciate being able to go hang out with friends, or go on trips, or even going to university, even just going to your classes. It's something that before was a very mundane activity, but suddenly you're going to see it in a very new light, something that you might really value. And I think your generation, as a result, will have a much healthier worldview, and maybe an appreciation of what normal life is that you otherwise couldn't have had. If you remember back to your grade 10 classes, you might have been with Miss Burton, or maybe somebody else who talked about the hero's journey. In order for the hero to have their journey, they have to first get yanked away from their comfort zone. They have to get out of the cave. And COVID, as much as it sucks, is giving you a chance to get yanked out of the cave and see the world in a very different way. And that, in some ways, is a gift. And Emerson would say that this is an opportunity for you to experiment and to find out who you are when the chips are on the table. And if you stumble and mess up and you don't like who you are because of this disruption, it's a chance for you to change, and that can sometimes be a gift. Anyways, there's so much more in this video. There's too much for me to talk about. If I tried to go through the whole thing, I mean, we would be here for an hour. We all know how that works. But I want you to watch it, and then, just like always, you're going to come to your assignment, 2.1c, Enlightenment in Literature, our Declaration of Intellectual Independence, and just record your notes. This is the last video we're going to do this for, and so our next assignment will kind of tie all of these pieces together. So go ahead, take a watch, record your notes, and get yourself ready for the next one. Hope you guys are all doing well, and we'll talk again soon. Bye.